going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website. And this week we are back for the penultimate in the Core Set 2019 stories, and that is Chronicle of Bolas Perspectives by Kate Elliott. My quick review at the top of this one, very, very good. It continued along the lines from last week, and it's definitely a must-read if you, unless you don't give a damn about Nicol Bolas as a character, but if you even give a little bit of a damn, this story is definitely for you. It was very, very good. What about you? What are your thoughts?
My quick review, kind of using that as a basis, would be this story will make you care at least a little bit about Nicol Bolas as a character.
That's a fair point.
Badass.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. Yeah.
Like you said, must read. I would say best one yet. Best one yet.
Yeah. I think it was really good. So yeah, that's our quick review at the top. So if you have not actually read the story yet, the link to that story is down in the description box below. So feel free to go read it and then come back here and join in on our review. As we always say, we review, we do not summarize. So onto the full review itself. Yeah, I mean, this, you know what I will say though, on this one, I feel like you have to have read the other stories to fully appreciate this because of the contrasts that are purposefully drawn between Egons' recollection of the goings-on and then Nicol's recollection or Bolas's recollection now of what happened.
And I feel like a lot of the points in this story where those differentiations could have been made, I was sitting there going, I can't really remember back to exactly what Egons' perspective on this was in this particular scenario. So, but I loved this story as it is, and I feel like we'll get to a couple of spots where maybe you can kind of remind me of some of those.
Yeah, I definitely wrote some stuff down because it really did. This story, I'm gonna just touch on this, and I really don't feel like getting into our opinions. If you really want to give yours, you're more than welcome to. But I think that it was crazy how incredibly topical this story was for our world here, Earth.
I definitely felt that way too, and I was sitting there going, I wonder if he's picking up on that.
Yeah.
At least in the same way I was, because I'm not sure that we're on the same wavelength here, but I think we are.
Yeah, no, it really was like, you need to be aware of the bias of the person telling the story to you or who you're getting your information from.
Well, that's not really topical. That's just, society.
True.
Since the dawn of time.
Yes. I just think it's so much more prevalently discussed more recently with, at least, and because there are international viewers, at least for the political climate here in the States, which, again, as a global audience, you may be aware of, you may not be, but, I'm just saying, again, for or against, I don't care what side you're on or if you're in the middle. All I'm saying is that I think it's very interesting that this is coming, or these stories now are coming on the heels of, or in the middle of what's going on now here in the real world. I think it's such an interesting parallel that is going on. And I mean, again, this has been the set of parallels, or the stories with parallels all over it. So it only made sense.
And I think that it's funny that how you phrased that was that it matters who's telling the story.
Oh, yeah.
Because all of that being said kind of makes me wonder a little bit about the bias behind the author writing that into the story.
You mean Kate specifically?
Kate or whoever was helping Kate.
Okay, right, like Kate and Nick Kelman from the Wizard side, etc. Okay.
Or editing.
Okay.
Or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting point. Yeah. And if you follow people like Kate Elliott on Twitter, you can see some of those opinions come through based on tweets that she makes, or and I don't mean to single Kate out here. That's not fair. But like anybody, right? If you're aware of their political leanings, you may feel differently about this story than other people might feel reading this story. Because to be honest, there are two ways of looking at this.
Yeah.
You can look at this story as being, holy crap, listen to Nicol Bolas twisting everything around and making him, he just is such a jerk. Or, in my opinion, you could look at this story and go, interesting, so that's Bolas's perspective. I wonder what Egons fabricated.
Right.
Because Nicol Bolas is the villain. He has been presented to us as the villain. Egons has been presented as the good guy, but as we've seen with characters like Urza in the past, that line between good and evil is not very clearly drawn.
Right.
Ever, really. Right? I mean, it doesn't have to be with magic stories. Just in general. You don't need a bright line of definitively evil, definitively good. That doesn't, and we've talked about that a lot in this show where, I've said, who am I supposed to be rooting for here? And sometimes you don't know. And these stories were, I think, a good way of us, and I mean all these stories from M19, were a good way of us learning about Nicol Bolas and his motivations prior to us going to Ravnica and seeing the good guys in the Planeswalkers versus the bad guys in Nicol Bolas and his group. And so,
yeah, I mean, my argument to that has always been people are people, characters are characters, and everybody's just always trying to do what they think is right and interpreting the world through their own eyes, and different things affect different people differently. Different. And so there in real life really is no bright line between good and evil. And so maybe you kind of jump to the, well, Nicol Bolas fabricated things, so I guess Egons did too. And my thought is, well, what if neither of them truly did? What if that's both just truly how they see what happened to them?
Or the opposite, which, to be fair, I should have mentioned but didn't, is that everything that Egons said was fabricated and nothing that Nicol Bolas said was. Because that's the other option, right? I mean, I'm sure that it is somewhere in the middle. I think these stories are supposed to make you believe that everything that Egons said was completely true, and everything that Bolas said that was different from what Egons said was a lie and an exaggeration.
I don't think that that's true, because I think that Wizards of the Coast is smart enough to know that the readers of these stories are smart enough to know that that's not reality. That's not how things are.
Right.
Every little intricacy, every little nuance of fabrication or truth is based on that person's interpretation. And not just their interpretation, but it's also fed by their insecurities. If there's a certain insecurity that someone has, they're going to put a spin on something that makes it sound not as though they are of whatever that insecurity is.
Right. Or that they are lesser because of it.
Right. And that might not be a lie. They might just, that might be a lie that they're saying because it seems insignificant to them. Whereas in the reality, in the scope of how it affects everyone around them, maybe it is. But, there's also the opposite of that, where maybe it's a really, really big lie and they don't care how it's affecting other people. Or maybe it is a small lie and it's actually not affecting other people and it's not changing other people's interpretation of them.
Right.
Just telling them the actual truth would change people's interpretation of them and actually make it so that that person's interpretation of how things went is more skewed instead of less skewed.
Mm-hmm. And
just because of their bias.
Right.
So I think people have a bias to begin with, and that puts a spin on the truth. And then someone else's bias comes in, and they're trying to counter that bias, and there's just so many biases from so many different facets.
Yeah.
I can't even say angles because there's just so many. It's like faceted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think the truth ultimately is just, if you were to shave off that outer layer with all the facets and it's just the underneath smooth surface.
Right.
To me, that's what the truth actually is.
Right. And if you're working in cliches, you deal with, there's 3 sides to every story, side A, side B, and the truth. Like what one person will tell you, what the other person will tell you, and then what actually happened. And I think going into this story, Neiva, hearing this story from Nicol Bolas himself, it seemed like Neiva was only listening to Nicol Bolas in an attempt to stall for time.
Right.
That she didn't care what he was actually saying, like the substance of it. She was just like, let me get him talking, let me piss him off a little bit, dig in a little, and get him to be annoyed.
Right.
And then at the end, maybe I'll be able to get out of this alive.
Yeah. Maybe Beatia will be awake, or whatever.
Yeah, they'll get the information that they needed, etc. So,
or if he just ultimately kills me, maybe Beatia and grandmother or
Yasova
will just be fine.
Yeah.
Maybe he won't realize.
Because she said that. She said if he kills me, then he won't get the information out of me as to where they are.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the other option. But you know what I found interesting, though, is that she kept saying that she was going to keep him distracted because he could easily get it out of her mind. And again, I think the timeline is a little weird. I don't know exactly when this occurred, although this is old Yasova, so it had to have been at some point beyond when she was, released as a character, so beyond Fate Reforged. I assumed in the Dragons of Tarkir timeline, but who knows? But because we saw Nicol Bolas, and we saw him just go into someone's mind, Jace's mind, and everybody else, really, and just take whatever he wanted by force, and this child was giving him trouble? I have trouble believing that. So I'm confused as to why Nicol Bolas would have even wasted his time. I mean, sure, telling the story is one thing, but then he's like, tell me where they are, and he ends up having to manipulate her by preying on her jealousy toward her twin, as opposed to just going into her mind and taking what he wants. I didn't fully understand the reasoning behind that, because we all know that, because I think we all know that he's powerful enough to have done it, and so if he truly wants it, sure, maybe it's just nicer for him to be able to say...
It's not about taking the information, it's about getting it from her.
Okay, from tricking her into giving it to him?
It's about manipulating her to a point where she then either is actually that much of a betrayer, or she betrays them and then feels so guilty about it.
Yeah. And has to live with that.
That's what manipulators do. They take your power away from you, and they force you to either hate yourself or hate everything.
Right. Or become as uncaring as them, kind of an idea.
Right.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah, and you know what? It's super funny. When Nicol Bolas started, and he started saying, Ugin isn't my twin, or wasn't my twin, he lied about all that. I wrote in my notes, I was like, how pissed would everybody be if that was really the case? That it has been 6 stories of Ugin telling us what's been going on, and then Bolas comes in the 7th of 8 stories and is like, oh, that was a lie, here's what really happened. It's like, what?
Well,
you,
see,
you just strung us along?
See, you're going, what if, like, people would be so pissed if that was true. Like, I was sitting there going, okay, I can see how, if Ugin told it from his perspective, he wouldn't realize that Bolas was awake before him, was moving around before him, this, that, and the other. Because if he woke up after, started flying after, I can see how he would see it as them doing it at the same time.
I don't fully buy that, but that's because of then, as we were saying, that's because of all the other things that followed it. Like, one of the most egregious for me was the idea of they're on the mountaintop, right, of the birth mountain when Ugin shows back up, and the Nicol Bolas says that the wind swirls up and it obscures Ugin from his view, and then Ugin disappears and fled. Well, no, Ugin planeswalked away right in front of you, is really what happened. And so you're now saying that he didn't planeswalk away but ran away because, one, then it could continue to, you would be able to continue, I don't know why I can't speak, to say that he is a coward and that he ran away.
And that he wasn't a planeswalker.
Correct, and that he wasn't, that Nicol was in fact first. Exactly. Those are the two reasons that I saw. The other, or another thing, because there were many, another thing that I wrote down was just the concept of Ugin mentioned planeswalking back to Dominaria and seeing the horns on top of the birth mountain that he noticed were Nicol's horns, right? They were a recreation of his twin brother's horns, and he thought how arrogant that was, that Nicol would create a throne or a shrine to himself at the top of the birth mountain like that. And yet when you hear Nicol tell it to Neiva, he says that the horns were there as a monument to all dragon kind.
Right.
But they're a duplication of your horns. So, are they? I mean, Ugin was able to...
How far off are they from other dragons' horns?
Look at the other dragon's horns. I mean, it's... we all know that those are pretty iconic, almost diamond-shaped horns. We have seen that, especially through Amonkhet and seeing them kind of depicted on the meditation plane a lot of times in like, art depictions and stuff through wizards and stuff. But like, I don't know. To me, it was like, no, it's pretty obvious that those are Bolas horns as opposed to anybody else.
Right.
And so, but Bolas is like, no, it's to all dragonkind, not just to me. That's foolish. Of course it's not just to me. So, again, just another example to me of like, just gross exaggerations or spinning of...
Well, and that's another example to me of how his insecurities affect what he says so thoroughly. Mm-hmm. And the only reason why his arrogance is an insecurity of his is because Ugin said it. Mm-hmm. At this point, he's trying so hard to act like whatever Ugin has ever said to him is just ridiculous and terrible and this, that, and the other, when in reality, the only things that actually affect whether he does or does not care about something is because Ugin has made him care or not care about it.
And speaking of which, the last thing that I wrote here in terms of contradictions between the two stories or again, interesting parallels, the one part of the story where Nicol Bolas says that he travels back to Dominaria after he gets his spark and he planeswalks away, and then he does what Ugin said he did, which was travel to hundreds and hundreds of worlds. Although if you notice, I don't remember exactly, and I wish I did, but I believe Ugin said that he traveled to hundreds of worlds, and if that's true, then it's hilarious because Bolas said he traveled to hundreds of worlds and then hundreds more. So it's even more of an indication of like, but I'm better than my brother. Don't forget, Ugin may say that he did those things, but I did it better.
Right. He's that annoying one-upper guy that he will just make shit up. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, he will just say he's done some level higher than whatever you've done.
Yeah.
Even if he's never even thought about doing that thing.
Oh man, I was so tired. I only got like 5 hours of sleep last night. Really? Well, I only got like 3. Okay, guy. Thanks. congratulations, I guess. You win this not competition that we were having. So, yeah, but something that I wrote here that I found was interesting was the fact that Nicol Bolas, when talking about Arcades, when he comes back from walking the plains and checking out all the different areas, he comes back and he says of Arcades that Arcades ruling over Dominaria is so small-minded in comparison to he, who has now walked all the plains and seen all of them, that like ruling over one plain is nothing because it's so insignificant. Well, I don't know about you, but I totally remember Ugin saying that to Nicol Bolas a week or two ago. Mm-hmm. He literally said that to him. He's like, I don't care that you had this Elder Dragon war and now you're bragging about it to me. That's nothing. There are countless realms out there, and this is nothing. And then Nicol Bolas is like, oh, I feel so betrayed, and you're a coward, and you hid. You didn't travel plains. You're a liar. And
then when he does it, he's like, yeah, see, I'm this big planeswalker, and you other peon dragons are not as good as me, clearly, because I can travel worlds.
He just, you could tell that he, got punked by Ugin in that moment, and so he had to turn around and say something to Arcades to make himself feel better.
I mean, basically, he got punked. He got punked by Ugin in life.
Yeah. And I'm curious now if this story is really true, where it means that Ugin was the first planeswalker of all time. It seems like that might be the case. But
I was like, where did this lie come from? Where did he just all of a sudden decide that just because he was a planeswalker that he was the first? Well, I understand wanting at that point to be a planeswalker before Ugin was, which you were not. But why would you think you were the first?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like you said, I wonder if that means that actually Ugin was the first.
Right. And you know what I think is interesting is we kind of, in this story, at a certain point, we got to the point where Ugin's story left off. Right? We got to that moment where Ugin kind of planeswalked away from Nicol Bolas, and that was it from because we heard from Ugin's perspective, right? And then Ugin's just traveling to different planes and learning different things, whatever. But that's kind of where it ended last time we heard about these two together. And so now we hear Nicol Bolas telling more of his story of that's when he sparked, and that's when he traveled, and then that's what he says to Arcades when he comes back, and all these other things. But the interesting thing is that comes at the tail end of this version of events that Nicol Bolas tells. And so the question in my mind was, how much of it after Ugin's story can we actually believe? How do we know that that's when he sparked? Because again, that's assuming that you believe after reading this story that it was Nicol Bolas who was bending the truth. And if he was bending the truth so much to kind of badmouth Ugin, then how can you believe anything else that he says for the rest of the story? And again, that draws parallels back to us now as well in this world, right, of where do you lay your trust? If someone lies to you, do you then never believe, or are you aware then that it's going to be much more difficult for you to believe what they're saying to you in the future? Or do you literally take every individual thing that they say and attempt to ascertain whether that statement is true or not?
Right.
Because that's either way is really a valid way of doing it. Either you feel betrayed and you feel lied to by something that someone said to you, and so now you're like, you know what? Everything you say from now on is suspect.
Yeah.
You've lied so many times, or I've caught you in these lies, and so now I cannot believe a thing you say. Or you're just kind of inherently trusting, and you say, you know what? You lied to me that one time, but I'm going to hear you out on the next thing that you have to say, and then I'll determine for myself whether I believe that that is what you've said or not. And that in and of itself is a bias.
Right.
Do you just not believe anything that that person says anymore because they've shown themselves to be untruthful in the past?
Right.
Or even chronically untruthful, if they've done it many times. It's an interesting thing that, I looked at here because I was like, okay, we're now past the point of where Ugin has told us things that have happened, and now we're on to just Nicol Bolas, but now how much of it can we trust if we believe that Ugin's statement of events are the true statements and Nicol Bolas is the one lying? I found that very interesting, and I'd love any and all of your opinions, and of course if you have any thoughts on that.
My thoughts on that are simply that I think we'll ultimately find out what the truth is.
Hopefully.
But I don't think that it makes sense to trust that either of them are a reliable source for that information.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. Okay. Yeah. And like Amy said, we will have to wait and see, because obviously next week is the finale of this whole thing. But before we close up, we still have to talk about, then after Nicol Bolas is done telling his story, we get back to Neiva. And Neiva, it was interesting. This seed has been planted both in her and in us as the readers, that we understand that Neiva, when manipulated enough, can have her distrust of her twin, or her jealousy towards her twin, kind of bolstered as a way to get into her head. And Bolas has done it before, seemingly, based on the descriptions that have been given in the past. And now, as Amy mentioned, Nicol Bolas is now trying to get Neiva to hand over Yasova and or Betia, and give in their location and say where Ugin is as well. And
right, but even if he didn't need her to figure that out, because he really doesn't, like you said, he could just suck that information out of her mind, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense for him to manipulate her and figure out a way to control her, because he's collecting followers. And even if they're not true followers, like Liliana, they're followers out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And he's collecting them.
Yeah.
Because he's raising armies and, doing all kinds of things.
Right, and for a guy like Nicol Bolas, I'm sure that worshippers or people who think that, who are going to be there to continue to tell him how great and powerful he is, I'm sure he would not be upset by that either.
Well, but it's not even that. It's about having people to do your bidding.
True.
Because like I said, even if they're unwilling, he has them.
Yep. And then, just that
so
moment.
So that he can be the ruler that he said the other dragon was.
Arcades, yeah.
Arcades.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, Nicol Bolas does truly seem to be, I think we've understood.
In reality, the people actually loved Arcades, which is why he was the ruler.
Yes, well, he was their protector as well, right. Yeah.
But we also know, in terms of history, that just because that's how you become a ruler doesn't mean that that's how you go out when you go out as a ruler. Eventually, your subjects fall out of love with you.
Empires rise and fall.
Yeah.
But so then you have that moment of Neiva being manipulated, because at first it seemed like she was the manipulator. She was getting Bolas to talk. She was getting him riled up. She was kind of smirking about it, because Neiva has been the parallel to Bolas this entire time. In all of these stories, Neiva has been the Bolas on Tarkir, whereas Bolas has been the Bolas, or Nicol has been the Bolas in the past.
Bolas has been the
flashbacks.
Bolas.
Yeah, that's it. He's been himself. And so now you find out that, those parallels really only go so far, because Nicol Bolas is a lot more powerful. And
well, yeah.
And
a lot more manipulative than Neiva is. Because she was pleased with herself that she did just a little bit of manipulation.
Yeah.
And now he has forced her to put a blade to Betia's neck.
Right.
So
again, parallel to Ugin and Nicol Bolas, where, you know, they were twins, they loved each other, they lived together. No matter whose accounting of the story you believe, that remained a true thread.
Right.
And then it's kind of, you know, Nicol Bolas says that Ugin betrayed him and that Nicol was just defending himself.
Right.
Or Ugin saying, like, that, you know, Nicol Bolas is just crazy, right? Just depicting him as a crazy person or a crazy dragon. And that, you know, that's how he went about things. And so
I don't think he was depicting him as crazy.
I think he was saying the things that he did, and I was interpreting some of it as crazy.
Yeah, I think you were.
That's
because
fair.
I didn't interpret it as that at all.
That's fair.
I interpreted it as he thinks that Bolas is ignorant.
Oh, yeah.
And as a result of that ignorance, his actions have caused such destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And that destruction is why Ugin has decided to hate him. Not because he feels that Nicol Bolas is responsible fully for that destruction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more reasons why Ugin doesn't like him. I mean, there's also the betrayal of him using his mind powers on his brother,
Yes.
of his of Nicol's unwillingness to listen to what Ugin has to say, and where Ugin just feels like he's just so far gone at that point that it's almost not worth it. And so that's kind of why Ugin just is like, forget it, and just planeswalks away, because he's like,
Right.
You will never understand. You're too small-minded. Again, the same thing that Bolas said to Arcades, like I mentioned, and just kind of like, you're beneath me, you're not worth it, and then he walks off. Literally walks off.
But the thing is, with people who are too small-minded, that doesn't mean that they'll always be too small-minded. And I
Correct.
think that people don't realize that.
Mhm.
People evolve.
Yeah.
And people get to different levels in their life
Mhm.
and in their psyche
Mhm.
that help them understand their own mortality, their own deficiencies,
Mhm.
their own ways in which they have manipulated situations or let their biases get in the way of them being truthful or doing the right thing, you know, and that doesn't mean that they can see that at that moment, right?
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that they can't later in life see that.
Yeah.
And I think that Ugin, for thinking that, is also small-minded.
That's fair. I mean, I think that Ugin was just, I don't know. I think Ugin might have felt just so betrayed at that point where he's like, how do you not see this? How do you not see that?
I feel like that's just,
Excuse me.
I feel like that's just being so nitpicky. You know, I feel like there's a level, you know, like you gotta pick your battles, right? Like, yeah, you can be pissed off about the mind control thing. No, I get it. That's sucky. But, like, I feel like once you talk to him about it, you learn his motivations for doing it. You realize he wasn't really doing it because he wanted you to do his bidding until the end of time. I don't know. I feel like there's a point where you can forgive that.
That's interesting. I don't see it that way,
Okay.
but that's a very interesting point. I don't think that you're off base. I never saw it that way. So that's really cool.
Because I feel like if he had actually really listened to Nicol in that moment where they had that discussion,
Mhm.
I feel like this division between the two of them wouldn't have happened. I feel like they would have come back together at that point, and they could have actually been twins again.
Oh, see, that's interesting. I think that they discussed stuff a lot. You know, I think that they discussed their rationale behind things and their opinions and their you know, whatever, their ideologies quite a bit. and they still didn't match up. And I think Ugin was the one. I think you're correct in saying that Ugin was the one who was like, forget it, I'm out of here, I can't deal with this.
Right, but
Instead of waiting and possibly hearing him out further, but I thought, I kind of sided with Ugin in thinking that, like, I don't know, I felt like that was, he had heard all he needed to hear.
I don't. I
That's
think,
fair.
I really think that they could have met in the middle somewhere if there wasn't just so much misplaced hatred there.
Yeah, and I mean, and at that point, maybe Ugin would have been able to help ground Nickel a little bit,
Right.
To make all those like megamaniacal schemes kind of tamp him down a bit,
Right.
because he's Ugin and
Right.
he's the balancing factor for Nickel,
Exactly.
but Nickel is
Just
the one who
like
could
Nickel-
protect
Just
him.
like Nickel would have been able to keep Ugin from being like, well, everything's unimportant because everything is so much
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and then Nickel could be like, no, you know, you're here now, so what we're doing together now matters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can't just say it doesn't because you've seen other worlds, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why they're yin and yang, and they need to be together so that they can balance each other out. And I feel like during that conversation, they were still at a point where they, you know, they had been here and here, and they were going like this. And they met here for about 1 second, and then they went like this.
Yep.
And
then they
it
fought.
didn't have to be that way. It didn't.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think they would disagree with that last statement, that it did have to be that way.
No.
After they got to that point. But,
Right.
yeah.
Well, afterwards, once they both made those decisions that they, you know, were going to go off in their separate directions, there's no coming back from that.
That's true. Yeah, because then they're too far gone.
Right.
So
you can't say Nicol Bolas is too far gone or Ugin is too far gone. They're both
Right.
too far gone from each other.
I was going to say in their relationship with one another. Exactly. The last interesting point that I wanted to bring up was a quote that Amy had kind of brought to my attention that I thought was just something interesting and funny, kind of a lighter way to end it, was the line where Nicol Bolas says, he had dominion over the earth and all that lives on the earth. And what was your point to that?
I was like, wait a minute. Are they on the earth?
And that's a quote. I wrote that down. I looked at the screen and I wrote that down word for word. The quote is, dominion over the earth and all that lives on the earth. Now, I will say, in that new text, right, that font for flashbacks, everything is capitalized. Words or letters of words that should be capitalized are larger, and in this case, none of the letters in Earth were larger than the others, so it was supposedly, as we would understand it, all lowercase letters for the word Earth, and that was kind of my counter to your statement of like, what the hell's going on here? I said, well, you know, they use Earth to describe the ground, the dirt, etc., and your comment was?
And I said, well, that makes sense when the planet that you live on is Earth.
Right. Although, unless you try to say that the word Earth exists to just describe the dirt, and that the planet that we live on was named Earth because of it. That it's just made up of the dirt and etc.
Well, I just meant like if I was on Mars with a shovel and I was digging into the surface of Mars, I wouldn't say, well, I'm digging up Earth. I would
Some
say,
people might.
I
Some
would
people
say
might.
I'm digging into the surface of Mars,
Right.
or I would say I'm digging dirt.
Right. Some people might. Some people might call that Earth. They might. Not because it's from the planet Earth, but because of what it is. And I'm not, you know, an expert on the derivation of words or anything, but
Well, I mean, clearly, that sounds like a Bible verse line
right.
or something.
Yeah, exactly.
If you know that for a fact, please leave it in the comments. But it
Yeah.
sounds like it either is directly from the Bible or another religious text, or it's just very, very, very closely alluding to something of that nature.
It sounds similar, yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, if you know specifically that it is actually from a specific religious text, please leave that in the comments.
Yeah, let us know.
But, yeah, I mean, the wording there is obviously deliberate, probably more for that reason.
Right.
Than it is, it can't effectively accomplish that allegorical aspect if they change the wording to not be that. So I get it, but I also sat there and went,
Yeah.
wait, is it on Earth? They're on Earth.
Right. Oh, and that was the other thing, is that
Okay.
Nicol Bolas was the one who was like, and I named Dominaria. I named it Dominaria. Because I took its song for myself, the song being the Song of Dominia, or the aria of Dominia, Dominaria. Anyway. So, yeah. That was this week's story. Let us know your opinions, because in this one there actually was a little bit of discussion, a little bit of back and forth, whereas sometimes it's just, nope, we totally agree with each other, that's the way that it was, and let us know if you disagree with us.
And I feel like there was so much to talk about with this story, so please let us know if we're forgetting something.
Oh, yeah.
Because I totally right now feel like we are.
Definitely. And just to do a little bit of stuff for ourselves, right after I'm done filming this, after I finish producing it, etc., I am going to go meet up with our friend Dave, and I am going to be streaming. I'm going to be live streaming some Super Hot. If you've ever heard of the game, it's a lot of fun. Dave and I had a lot of fun playing it the last time, and Amy was there as well the last time we were all together. Amy is going to be hanging out here. I am going to be heading up to see Dave, and we'll be live on his stream, which obviously, by the time you're watching this, that will have passed. But you can watch the replay of it if it's something you're interested in. Seeing me and a friend of the channel play some video games, you can check that out as well. So feel free to check out the link in the description box below if you want to go to Dave's Twitch channel and find the replay of it. That would be cool. Let me know what you thought of that on Facebook and Twitter, because the other thing is we announced it on Twitter. So if you follow us on Twitter, if these things happen and it's not something that we planned necessarily a week ahead so that we could have let you know on the JaAR, then you'll be able to see it on Twitter. So those links are also in the description. Just go to the description is really what I'm saying here. But more importantly, if you go into those comments and you give us your opinions, thank you for doing that, because doing that combined with what we did here today are examples of all of us showing off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
That's right. I got it in there somehow. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I did want to point out one last thing. This technically, and not all of them are public on the channel, but I wanted to point it out because we have made a lot of them. This is officially our 400th video that we are uploading to our YouTube channel. 400 in like a little over 3 years. So thank you guys for watching any and all of these. If this is your first one, welcome. If you've watched many, thank you. Either way, thank you. Like I said...
If it is your first one, I guess you've got one heck of a backlog.
Yes, like I said, not all 400 are public, so don't,
I'm glad I've watched most of them.
Don't go counting and get upset that there aren't 400. Some of them are private or are yet to come out because we produced them and haven't put them out yet. So, but once again, thank you all so very, very much. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.